CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. The death toll rises in Israel and Gaza. The United Nations warns of an escalation into all-out war.
Our other headlines: the COVID pandemic was preventable and there were serious failures in the World Health Organization, the damning verdict of an independent report.
Roaring back after lockdown, the UK economy grew more than expected in March.
Amazon and paying tax. An EU court rules the internet giant did not receive an illegal deal from Luxembourg. Plus,
marriage and love life is not a necessity for me, but it's a necessity for my parents.
The search for love and marriage in a matchmaking park in Beijing.
the United Nations is warning of an all-out war between Israel and the Palestinians. Violence is continuing to escalate, with Israeli airstrikes hitting more targets in the Gaza Strip and hundreds of Palestinian rockets fired into Israel.
53 Palestinians are known to have died since Monday, including 13 children. 6 Israelis have also been killed. Here's Nicole Johnston.
This is Israel pounding the Gaza Strip, with hundreds of airstrikes on Wednesday morning. Israel says it's targeting the leaders of Hamas, the political group which controls the Gaza Strip, as well as hitting its offices and homes. But on Tuesday, Israel hit one of the largest residential buildings in Gaza, Hanadi Tower. Residents were given 2 hours warning to evacuate before it was reduced to rubble. Neighbouring buildings were also damaged. Across the border in al-Fahim in Israel, rising tension among Israeli Arabs outraged by the attacks on Gaza and the firing in the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem turned to violence. Similar scenes in Lod as well. Overnight riots by angry Israeli Arabs who burned a synagogue and cars. Rockets were also fired by the military wings of Hamas and Islamic Jihad deep into Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv. Israelis ran for cover in bomb shelters as their Iron Dome missile defence system faced a barrage of incoming rockets. Meanwhile, the Israeli military is on the move. Tanks and armoured vehicles are being positioned close to the Gaza border. At this stage, there has not been a ground invasion.
Yesterday, I told those sons of darkness, the Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists, that their blood is forfeit. And a short while ago, we eliminated top commanders of the Hamas General Staff, including the Gaza City Brigade commander and other commanders, and this is just the beginning. We'll hit them like they've never dreamed possible.
If they want to escalate, the resistance is ready. If they want to stop, the resistance is ready.
The US is calling for restraint from both sides.
We stand by Israel's right to defend itself. We also stand by the principle that Palestinians deserve the right to live in safety and security.
Back in Gaza, a car was hit by an Israeli airstrike on Wednesday morning. Palestinians say 3 civilians were killed.
This is a crime. They were civilians, a woman, her children, a barber and a shop owner. These are the people who were at the scene. The strike didn't hit a militant or an official. We are civilians sleeping in our own homes.
But there will be few people sleeping in Gaza or Israel as both sides shift closer to the brink of war. Nicole Johnston, CGTN.
Well, the destruction of the Hanadi Tower in the centre of Gaza by Israeli bombs has been one of the biggest developments of the recent upsurge in fighting. CGTN's Nicole Johnston lived in the tower herself while working in Gaza in 2011. The building was home to UN staff and Palestinian families as well as journalists. To hear her first-person account of life on the 8th floor, go to europe.cgtn.com.
Now, in a moment, our correspondent Stephanie Freed in Israel. First, let's take you to Noor Harazin in Gaza. Noor, bring us up to date. What's happened there in the last 24 hours?
Well, it has been a very hard and intense 24 hours on the people of Gaza, especially the past 12 hours when Israeli warplanes started targeting and destroying buildings and towers. And as you said, 13th floor towers. Only minutes ago from now, we heard Israeli raids and we got the news that the Israeli warplanes targeted a 14-floor building called Ashuruq building, and it is located in central Gaza City, specifically in a Rimal Street. And this street is one of Gaza's main streets. It's full of shops and markets, and it's a residential area. So this is a very hard thing for the Palestinian people here, especially civilians who are losing their homes. Hundreds of Palestinian people became now homeless. Many of them are now residing at UN schools or at the homes of their friends and relatives. This is a very hard thing for Palestinian people because here in Gaza it could take years for these homes to be rebuilt, or for a charity or an organization to offer these Palestinians a new housing unit. For example, towers that were destroyed in Gaza in the 2014 war, Israeli war in Gaza, some of them are not rebuilt yet. Some of them, the rebuilding process started only weeks ago. It's 7 years later. So the Palestinian people are really angry and upset about what is happening and how intense this escalation is. Every now and then we can hear continuous bombing and raids. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, the number of Palestinians killed in Gaza in the past 3 days is up to 56 Palestinians killed, including 14 children and 2 women, while more than 300 were injured.
Noor, Hamas says it's incensed by Israel's actions and that it's ready to escalate if necessary. How much appetite is there among ordinary people, ordinary Palestinians, for any kind of prolonged conflict?
Well, you can't say that 100% of the Palestinian people do support Hamas, especially that many of them think that it is not fair for Gaza to be dragged to a new war. However, when you are talking about times of escalations and wars, you can find the vast majority of Palestinian people supporting the militant resistance. And we're not talking about Hamas as a political faction. We're talking about the militants here in Gaza, the militant wings for Hamas and the Islamic Jihad and the PLFP and the DLFP. So you can find someone from Fatah, which is the rival party for Hamas, but at the same time do support the militant resistance, because for the Palestinian people, these rockets are the only way for Palestinians in Gaza to practice their right of self-defense or to send a message of solidarity to their brothers in Jerusalem.
Noor Harazin in Gaza, thank you very much.
Stephanie Freed is in the port of Jaffa near Tel Aviv, where many of the Hamas rockets are being aimed. So, Stephanie, a lot of violence overnight. What's the latest there on the ground in Israel?
Very latest in terms of the conflict and the back and forth with Gaza. An Israeli soldier was killed, hit by an anti-tank missile close to the Gaza border earlier on Wednesday, bringing the death toll on the Israeli side to 6. That certainly is a point of quite a bit of contention for the Israeli government. It's highly symbolic, an Israeli soldier being killed, or civilians in general being killed. Right now, Israel's Security Cabinet is meeting. The cabinet is going to be meeting. Got a little bit of activity happening behind me now. But essentially, let's go back to I'll talk about what's happening here, and then let's go back to what's happening between Gaza and Israel. The question on everyone's minds is what's going to happen in the long run. Will this continue days? People are actually speculating around a ground invasion, and that's certainly what will be discussed at the cabinet meeting. You know, Noor talked about the towers, as well as we heard in Nicole's report, Israel destroying high-rise towers. Israel's saying that they're going to destroy another high-rise tower in Gaza. They've issued a warning. And so now in central Israel, in Tel Aviv, there is concern around possible retaliation. There is the expectation that there will be more rockets fired here in Tel Aviv, central Israel. And then again, I'm in a mixed area that is populated by Jewish and Muslim residents. In a tremendous amount of tension in those areas, Lud, Jaffa, and Fahem, other areas inside of Israel, between the Jewish and Arab populations, fighting clashes. Some people have been killed in those clashes. Border police, special forces have been brought in, riot police, to contain that fighting within those cities. There are curfews that have been clamped down. So a lot boiling, a lot bubbling. And again, in central Israel, expecting perhaps another rocket attack in the coming hours.
Stephanie, there have been strong words on both sides. What's the sentiment within the Israeli government and among the public?
Within the government, though, that's where most of the strong words are coming from, is it basically a position of not backing down. Going forward, Israel's defense minister, Benny Gantz, said earlier in the day, Israel's going in and not going to go for a ceasefire here, despite the fact that the international community is calling, even demanding for a ceasefire. Israel's position is to go in and finish the job for once and for all. Go in and knock out Hamas capability, rocket capability, etc. As far as people are concerned, there's fear, a tremendous amount of fear. People are living in their shelters. Schools are closed. There's a tremendous amount of fear around the fact, around Hamas's capability, what they've seen, salvos of rockets beyond what they've ever seen before, and the far-reaching capability of those rockets. And anger. People are angry, and certainly there are those who say, yes, the government should go in and finish this. And of course, there are others who say the tactic isn't working. It's time to change to a different tactic. This has been ongoing for 20 years.
Stephanie Fried in Jaffa, many thanks.
The pandemic was preventable and millions of people died needlessly. The damning verdict from an independent panel investigating the global response to coronavirus. World leaders were roundly criticized for not reacting faster, with the panel concluding that global political leadership was absent. Let's talk to our correspondent Tony Waterman in Brussels. Tony, this independent investigation isn't pulling its punches, is it?
No, absolutely not, Jamie. This was a rather scathing report that really painted a picture of this absence of global leadership during this pandemic, and systems that are archaic and cumbersome, these systems that are supposed to immediately respond to health crises like the one that we're seeing. At one point, it was described as analog in a digital world. But the panel criticized the WHO, saying that it took too long to call the COVID-19 pandemic a health emergency of international concern. They also had scathing critiques of developed nations who in the early days of 2020 in February kind of took this wait-and-see approach, which led to hospital systems becoming overwhelmed in this scramble to procure personal equipment, personal protective equipment and medicines. But the bottom line of this 8-month review, this independent review, which was requested by the WHO, is that not only could this have been preventable, but it has been the the scale of it has been exacerbated because of poor coordination and unpreparedness. Take a listen.
This is an ongoing disaster that we believe could have been prevented. The evidence shows that an outbreak became a pandemic because of failures, gaps, and delays in preparedness and response. This was partly due to a failure to learn from the past.
Too many countries, including some of the wealthiest, devalued the emerging science, denied the disease's severity, delayed responding, and ended up sowing distrust among citizens with literally deadly consequences.
Tony, it's pretty sobering stuff. What changes does the panel suggest are needed?
Well, the panel makes a list of recommendations, some for the short term, some for the longer term. In the immediate term, they're calling on rich nations to commit to donating 1 billion doses of vaccines to countries which take part in the COVAX facility. They're really struggling to get their hands on these vaccines as we see them piling up in the richer countries. They're also calling on vaccine makers to bring into force licensing agreements so that these vaccines can start being produced in other places to try and ramp up capacity. They said if this doesn't happen in the next 3 months, then that WTO patent waiver should be triggered. In the longer term, they're saying that the WHO needs to be given more power so that it can go in quite immediately, very swiftly into country where there's an emerging outbreak and they can start their investigation. They also say that WHO should be economically and politically independent, and they're calling for a funding facility to be created with an annual budget of about $10 billion to go towards preparedness. We know that we have seen these types of reports in the past, these plans in the past that have just collected dusts on government shelves. So we're going to have to see if this one gets implemented any better than the ones we've had in the past.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, how life post-pandemic will never be the same again, according to one business guru.
I think the pandemic has basically turbocharged a number of changes around consumer behaviour and also how we engage with the world that simply aren't going to go back again.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
And welcome back to Global Business Europe. Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. Also on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Britain is back after the lockdown. The UK economy grew more than expected in March, gearing up for what's expected to be a sharp economic comeback. Juliet Mann has all the details. Juliet.
Thanks, Jamie. Yes, well, we've been looking at new GDP figures, the latest indication of the damage done to the UK economy as a result of the lockdown at the beginning of January. And there's been a pickup in economic activity. Now, during March, GDP grew by 2.1%, with expansion across all output sectors. A few factors here pushing up activity: the reopening of schools, COVID testing, vaccinations, a flurry of construction, and consumers spending some of their lockdown savings. Now, let's look at the first quarter, the first 3 months of 2021. GDP contracted just 1.5%, led by declines in services and production output. Now, but all of these numbers taken together reinforce what the Bank of England said last week about expecting Britain's economy to recover quickly and grow by 7.25% in 2021. There's also an improved outlook in the EU. Now, we're now looking at 4.2% growth for the EU 27 in 2021 and 4.4% in 2022. And that's due to an improved vaccination campaign and the expectation that EU-wide fiscal stimulus will kick in the second half of the year. Vicky Price is a board member at the Centre for Business and Economic Research. I asked her if the UK GDP data marks a turning point for the economy.
The UK economy, or bits of it, have been growing for quite some time. If you look at manufacturing, for example, and construction, they have been on an upward trend since the summer, since early summer 2020. What had lagged behind was services. And what the latest data is telling us is that finally the retail sector, consumer spending generally, is picking up. And some of the money that people had saved is now finally being used to buy goods and services that we weren't able to do before. And that will accelerate inevitably as more restrictions are lifted.
So those are some of the bright spots, but these numbers don't disguise the damage in other areas, like trade.
Absolutely. I think we've had, of course, Brexit, which has affected trade, certainly for a while at the turn of the year. The end of the transition period has meant that quite a lot of restrictions have come into place in terms of checks and paperwork that needed to be completed, and that has affected trade. There is no doubt that that is going to be an issue. But trade, manufacturing trade more generally, has done reasonably well. And of course, we have been helped by the fact that the US and China have been growing, quite solidly for quite some time, and world trade is picking up. Yes, of course, it fell in 2020, less than people had expected, but it's certainly now showing signs of, in fact, accelerating in the positive direction. So that's been helpful. But yes, there are still sectors that are affected right now as we come out of this, the entire travel industry. Airlines, we've seen, of course, they haven't been able to have the passenger numbers they had before. Airports have suffered, but also the entire sort of tourism area on which the UK and others depend quite a lot.
What do you think the impact's going to be then of further easing of lockdown, of reopening up the economy?
We're already seeing that there is a substantial bounce back taking place. A lot of pent-up demand there. Everyone's been talking about this, but there are signs now that this is coming. Of course, we have to remember that a year ago we saw a very sharp fall in the early summer, and of course, if you look at the data now on a year-on-year basis, we'll be doing reasonably well. But for the moment, if you just look at the March data, we're still about 6% below where we were pre-pandemic. So if you compare it with February 2020, I think we're going to see that gap closing quite quickly. The expectations are that by the end of this year, with a bit of luck, we will have recovered back to February 2020 levels. What will happen after, of course, is a big question mark, because investment has been weak. We saw that actually in the quarterly data that just came out. How you get that to recover? The government has put huge amounts of money into the economy, both in terms of fiscal expansion and also monetary easing, and is also supporting now investments through all sorts of new measures. Let's hope they work, because without that, we won't get back to growth rates that should at least cover the fact that we would have had, by the end of this year, practically 2 years of no growth if you add the two together. And that, of course, is something that needs to be made up. Will it be made up? And a lot hangs in the balance.
How does the UK compare to other G7 economies? I mean, looking at the Q1 numbers, that they're lagging behind the US, Germany, France, even Italy.
What we've seen, of course, is that the UK, mainly because it's been so dependent on services, saw a much sharper fall in 2020. The result is, of course, that it's probably going to see a sharper recovery to make up for that fall. So if you just do the maths, obviously if you fall very sharply, even if you don't grow at all, your year-on-year position is going to be considerably better than perhaps some of the other countries will find when they calculate their data. What matters is whether that recovery is sustained. If we go back to just growing very, very gently in the future, then obviously we won't be able to make up what we lost. But I think in the end we'll probably see that countries come out back to pre-pandemic levels, including the UK, at more or less the same point in the months ahead.
So we've seen the topsy-turvy impact of the pandemic on economies. It's also had a dramatic impact on how we live, work and shop, forcing changes to businesses around the world. Simon Freakley is CEO of global management consultancy firm Alex Partners. I asked him whether he thinks 2021 will be as demanding as last year.
Some of these shifts, which have been sudden and violent, are not going back. So let me give you an example. Online activity. In 8 weeks of the pandemic, the quantity of online activity, the additional sales, were as much as had gone on in the 5 years previously. So an enormous lunge to online. And some categories where people hadn't been using online purchasing, like grocery, for instance, people, of course, through necessity, had to buy their groceries online. People have got used to doing that. Telemedicine is another example. You know, the uptake of telemedicine was quite slow, but during the pandemic it was a necessity. That is not moving backwards. And I think we'll see 2021 and beyond, you know, our increasing reliance on logistics, the fact that so many things now arrive at our doorstep by delivery, means that there will be a push, an acceleration for electrification of vehicles, for autonomous driving, as logistics get more and more sophisticated in delivering these products to our door. So I think violent shifts that are now permanent and will continue, new technologies that have accelerated and will continue to accelerate. I think the pandemic has basically turbocharged a number of changes around consumer behavior and also how we engage with the world that simply aren't going to go back again.
We're all going to have to get used to this new normal, in which case, what should every business have in their contingency toolkit?
Well, I think the one learning from this time, Juliet, is the need to remain flexible and agile, which I know is a little bit of a buzzword, but fundamentally it means that we mustn't become a hostage to any strategy that's worked before. We just have to look at the opportunities as well as the challenges in this new normal. We've learned to work in a different way, which will lead us to a hybrid way of working. But 2021 and beyond, I think, does represent a lot of opportunity. So fundamentally, strong leadership, not being held hostage to any strategies that have gone before, remaining fleet of foot as circumstances change, as new competitors enter our markets, working out how best to face off against them, how to use technology to our advantage. Data, of course, is essential, but I see a lot of companies that are data-rich and insight poor, so how we use technology and artificial intelligence to understand what the data is telling us about our customers, our supply chains, etc., are going to mark out the winners from the losers.
The United Nations has raised its global economic forecast to 5.4% growth this year. It says China will see growth of 8.2%. and the US economy will grow by 6.2%. But it warns the economic outlook in South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America remains fragile due to slow vaccination.
Shares in Chinese tech giant Xiaomi rose more than 6%. This after a US court filing showed the company would be removed from a blacklist. Earlier this year, the Trump administration said Xiaomi had ties to China's military, which the firm denies. Now both sides have agreed to resolve the litigation between them.
More than 40% of member firms in the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong say they're considering leaving the territory, with most citing the new national security law. Beijing and the Hong Kong government say the legislation, which punishes secession and subversion, will have no impact on ordinary life.
TUI continues to reel from the pandemic. The travel operator says its losses widened to nearly $1.8 billion for the first half of the year. TUI is hopeful that things will pick up over the summer. It's planning to reopen routes to holiday destinations including the Greek islands, the Canaries and Portugal.
The French court has ruled that Air France and Airbus should stand trial for involuntary manslaughter. The allegations relate to a plane crash in 2009, which killed 228 passengers above the Atlantic Ocean. The decision overturns a ruling from 2 years ago. A sister of one of the victims says the latest ruling was a relief. Amazon has won a landmark court battle against the EU over claims that it received illegal tax benefits from Luxembourg. The ruling from Europe's General Court overturns a decision made by the European Commission in 2017 that had ordered Amazon to pay over $300 million in unpaid duties. It's a blow to campaigners fighting to end so-called sweetheart deals that allowed tech giants to move their operations to low-tax jurisdictions. Chiara Potaturo is a EU tax policy expert with the charity Oxfam. Chiara, welcome to the programme. First of all, your reaction.
Good afternoon. So the verdict is, of course, a bit disappointing for us, but at the same time, it shows that this case-by-case investigation are not the solution. And in any case, the verdict wouldn't have stopped Amazon and Luxembourg to favor global tax jogging. We know that Amazon, for example, in 2020 recorded really high sales in Europe, but pay no taxes in its Luxembourg headquarters. And in addition to that, we have seen in the Open Lux media investigation in February, as also Luxembourg continues to act as a tax haven, and it allows thousands of shell companies to register within its border. And as Oxfam, we have also demonstrated that Luxembourg has some economic indicators, like foreign direct investment, that are typical of tax haven and are disproportionate compared to its weight. So this verdict, yes, is disappointing, but the problem would have been still the same.
Well, Amazon will tell you that, quite simply, they have won a landmark court battle against the EU over its claims. I want to ask you, what do you want to happen next?
Yeah, as I said, this verdict also demonstrates that we need really real tax reform. We have to rethink the tax system. And for example, the proposal for a digital tax that will be tabled by the Commission in July, it's a good step, and it will target for sure also Amazon. Then at an international level, there is a discussion that is going to an end, to a proposal for a minimum taxation. And this would also be could also be a part of the solution. And then at European level, we have to address the tax haven in the EU, like Luxembourg. And we need tax transparency. In particular, there is negotiation among the EU institutions for public country-by-country reporting that will oblige companies like Amazon to publish how much they earn in each country and how many taxes they pay. And this would have helped also the European Commission in this case.
Chiara Potaturo from Oxfam, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks to you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Lessons from coronavirus. The British government says there will be a public inquiry into the pandemic.
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination programme offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, Ricky, loud, clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we try to save the world.
Awesome! We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Paul Barber. Our top stories: the death toll rises in Israel and Gaza. The United Nations warns of an escalation into all-out war.
The COVID pandemic was preventable, and there were serious failures in the World Health Organization. The damning verdict of an independent report.
And roaring back after lockdown, the UK economy grew more than expected in March.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says an independent public inquiry into the handling of the pandemic will be held next spring. Johnson says the probe will investigate what mistakes the government made. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson is in Oxford. So, Andrew, was this inevitable?
Yeah, I think if you look at the ONS figures, more than 150,000 people died with COVID-19 on their death certificate, somewhere implicated. Definitely the country needs answers, and the Prime Minister knows he's obliged to provide them. It's all about understanding what went wrong. That's why you have a public inquiry for lessons learned for the future. And the Prime Minister entered today into the House of Commons full of enthusiasm for the idea. He said all the materials will be gathered, all the evidence will be given under oath. This will be a full statutory public inquiry. The scope and arrangements will be as wide as necessary. The Cabinet Ministers is discussing exactly this issue with the devolved governments in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales to make sure that they contribute all the questions they need so that everything is covered. He said state actions will be put under a microscope. The only kicker perhaps for some people is that the inquiry won't be set to start until May next year. Nevertheless, there was no mistaking his enthusiasm for the project in the Commons today.
So, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm today that the government will establish an independent public inquiry on a statutory basis with full powers under the Inquiries Act of 2005, including the ability to compel the production of all relevant materials and take oral evidence in public under oath.
So, Andrew, will it be enough to satisfy the opposition?
Well, Keir Starmer today, the opposition leader, pretty much went along with the idea. Certainly they encouraged the idea of an inquiry, and they'd certainly like a statutory public inquiry because that has the widest and strictest mandates around it. Keir Starmer pointed out, of course, you haven't made it clear who's going to chair this inquiry, what kind of justice we're going to get in terms of who's going to sit and preside over it. Is there going to be a panel that goes with that? Are you going to be talking to the families of those who have been bereaved by COVID-19? Are you going to look at frontline workers focus. So lots of questions about the actual terms of reference. But what will frustrate the Labour Party is that with this not starting until May 2022, if you look at the Chilcot inquiry, for example, into Iraq, that took 7 years. So almost certainly this will drift on until after the next general election in 2024, which may be what the government wants. It's certainly not what the opposition wants. But they will be gratified that it's not going to be something flimsy like a royal commission or a non-statutory inquiry which has no real terms of reference and tends to drift. This will be the real deal. It's just going to be a little slow getting it together.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew Wilson in Oxford.
The cost of living saw a bigger than expected jump in the US last month. The Consumer Price Index was up 0.8% on a monthly basis to 4.2% overall. It's now at its highest rate in over 12 years. Stock markets are lower again on that news after Tuesday saw one of the biggest falls in share prices since February. Live to New York now, and our John Terrett at the Stock Exchange. John, what can we read into these latest inflation figures?
Well, you know that phrase, the cost of living. I mean, it pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? It's everything you need to know in one small sentence there, because it's costing Americans more to live now on a day-to-day basis, and we have been warning about it. I've said on our program several times, everybody knows that inflation is coming. Everyone knows that inflation is out there, but ostrich-like, we've been sticking our head in the sands and choosing to ignore it and wondering when it would ever come and when we have any firm proof of it. Well, now we have firm proof of it. So as you said, Jamie, this is up just over 4% year on year and up 0.8% month on month. That's the biggest jump in 12 years. And it rather depends, it seems to me, on what you're buying. So food is going up. So we all have to buy food. Gas or petrol is going up. We all have to have that. And I don't think that's helped at all by the Colonial Pipeline issue that we've been experiencing this last week. But then over and above that, it's things like used cars. People have been buying used cars. Unbelievable, isn't it? Used cars. And the price of used cars, some used cars anyway, is almost as much as new cars here at the moment. And then on top of that, another thing that's been going up a lot is lumber, wood. Basic wood supplies, because people have been at home doing so much DIY. Now, the thing to remember is that these figures, although it was, I mean, they're not bad. It's not inflation like we had in the 1970s, but this is a greater number than I think was anticipated, almost 10%, whereas around 3% had been expected by Wall Street. But you must remember it's being compared to last year when we were going into this crisis and the prices were weakening all the time. Now, the Federal Reserve says that this is transitional, and this is what I meant yesterday when I was talking about Wall Street wondering whether the Fed is ahead of the game in terms of changing the tone of what it says, or potentially even beginning to raise interest rates to tamp down inflation, or whether it is, as Americans say, behind the eight ball. Wall Street doesn't know that. And of course, if you are a mum or a dad going out to buy the weekly shopping at the weekend, you're feeling it now in your pocket because stuff is costing you more. Now, the markets have been falling today as they did yesterday, but they've fallen again today because they assume that there's more to come. And of course, Jamie, it's not just inflation, is it? On top of that, we had the jobs news from last week, 266,000 jobs put on when 1 million have been expected, because apparently people are not ready to go back to work just yet. That has all sorts of supply chain issues, because this is a demand and supply chain issue as well. And on top of that, there's the chip crisis going on. So it's all coming together at once. The rotation continues then out of tech into the post-pandemic stocks here at the New York Stock Exchange. And there's more inflation data to come. On Thursday, we get PPI, which is producer prices. Today was what we pay in the shops. Tomorrow, what they pay to get the raw materials. And right now, the Dow is down today 1.2%, over 400 points. Jamie?
John, just to pick up on something you mentioned briefly, the problems with the Colonial Pipeline, which seemed a local problem earlier in the week, it really is now feeding into the wider economy, isn't it?
Well, sort of. I mean, you're right. It is a problem greater than I think we thought it was going to be. The owners of the pipeline, which goes all the way from Houston in Texas to New Jersey, so we will say today, Wednesday, when it'll be fully reopened again. In the meantime, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,800 gas stations have run out of fuel. State of emergencies now in North Carolina, where 71% of gas stations don't have any fuel. Virginia, Florida, and Georgia as well. The problem, though, is what I'm afraid is an American disease, and it's called panic buying. And the moment there's a hurricane on the radar, everybody goes out and buys everything. The shops are empty. And it's the same thing with petrol, I'm afraid. We are going to have to wait and see. I think it'll be okay. Fingers crossed.
John Terrace at the New York Stock Exchange. Thank you very much.
US Republicans have voted to remove Liz Cheney from their leadership following her criticism of former President Donald Trump. A number of Republicans had accused her of overshadowing the party's agenda, but some analysts say it's a sign of Trump's continued influence. Cheney held the third-ranking post in the House of Representatives. She's accused Trump of poisoning the US democratic system and says she won't be silenced.
I will do everything I can to ensure that the former president never again gets anywhere near the Oval Office. We have seen the danger that he continues to provoke with his language. We have seen his lack of commitment and dedication to the Constitution. And I think it's very important that we make sure whomever we elect is somebody who will be faithful to the Constitution.
Afghan security forces have mounted an operation to recapture a Taliban-held district outside the capital, Kabul. Insurgents say they've killed or captured government soldiers and forced others to retreat after storming the district of Nirk. A three-day ceasefire is due to begin at midnight. US troops are beginning a phased withdrawal from the country after a 20-year presence.
The COVID-19 death toll in India has passed the 250,000 mark. The country's health authorities say just under 255,000 people have now died. More than 4,200 deaths were reported in the most recent 24-hour period, although the new infection rate is falling slightly.
Indonesia says the Sinovac jab is 94% effective at preventing coronavirus symptoms in medical workers. The findings were based on data from 120,000 healthcare workers. The Chinese vaccine is under review by the World Health Organization for emergency listing. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the parents searching for love and marriage for their children at this matchmaking park in Beijing.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
What does a sustainable future mean? What can we do with millions of tons of plastics, glass, food, clothes piling up on our planet? Ahead of this year's pivotal COP26 summit, CGTN Europe looks at what consumers, businesses, and governments are doing to offer a better world to generations to come. Trash or Treasure starts May 17th on CGTN Europe.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. The French President Emmanuel Macron has announced that all adults can now book a COVID jab if there's an appointment available. So our reporter Ross Cullen took him up on the offer.
Wednesday, the 12th of May, marks the first day in France that adults aged 18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination. But it does come with conditions. They have to be spare doses. You have to go online at the end of each day to see if any vaccination centres have any unused doses left over and then book in to receive that shot the next day. It's all part of a strategy by the government to expand the vaccination campaign. It has been having some successes, with more than 657,000 shots being given on Tuesday this week alone. But the Prime Minister has admitted that the government is likely to miss its next target of first vaccinating 20 million people by the middle of this month, due notably to a slow take-up of the AstraZeneca vaccine. I'm here at a vaccination centre in northwest Paris, where they are administering the Pfizer and Moderna jabs. Merci. So I'm just going through the pre-steps now and making sure, just confirming my name, date of birth, and I'm going to have it in my left arm because I'm right-handed.
On y va pour Moderna?
Oui, pour Moderna.
Votre bras ici.
Okay, oui. I already had COVID-19. I suffered from it last year. So in fact, if you've already had COVID-19, you only need to have one vaccination dose. So today I'm going to have my one and only shot, and it will be the Moderna vaccine that I will be receiving. Oui. Okay. Oui. So that was that. That is me receiving the COVID-19 vaccination, a Moderna shot, today, and that is my one and only dose. Merci. Merci. So I have my official certificates now, the QR code that I will scan into the app, and the official record here that I had a vaccination. Now it's just to wait 15 minutes and make sure that everything is okay. So that's it. The 15 minutes waiting time is up. I don't have any immediate side effects. I'm free to go, and I've had my COVID-19 vaccination. Ross Cullen, CGTN in Paris.
A pregnant healthcare worker in Spain has given birth to the country's first baby born with COVID-19 antibodies. The news comes from a study looking into the effects of the coronavirus vaccine on pregnant women. Rahul Pathak reports.
Going through a pregnancy in the midst of a pandemic brings its own kind of extreme stress. So the news of a baby being born with coronavirus antibodies will be a relief to pregnant women in Spain and beyond. The baby, named Bruno, was born on the island of Ibiza in March and was the first registered newborn in Spain with COVID antibodies. His mother, a healthcare worker, had to be vaccinated as part of her job, so she decided, along with her pregnant colleagues, to join a study so researchers could find out more.
So by taking the vaccine during the third trimester of pregnancy does cause an immune response in the mother that creates antibodies. And those are transferred directly through the placenta to the baby, causing their passive immunity.
As a rule, pregnant women in Spain do not receive a vaccination against COVID-19, so research into this area is still very limited.
So to be clear, there are still many unknowns. We don't know how long the baby will have antibodies, if they will disappear in 2, 3, 4, or 6 months, just like the fact that we don't know this is for adults either.
The findings could also see vaccine hesitancy decrease amongst pregnant women, with many more, like Madrid resident Maria Urban, choosing to receive a jab to immunise both herself and her baby.
Right now, I'm in the third trimester of pregnancy, and I wish they could call me right now to get vaccinated, so I could protect myself and also my baby.
Now, this study would not have been possible a year ago or even a few months ago because, of course, the vaccines weren't available then. Added to that, babies that were conceived during the pandemic are only now being born, giving doctors a greater opportunity for further research. Medical experts hoping that the results will be significant in the ongoing fight to protect children from COVID-19. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
And staying in Spain, medical workers there who've been celebrating International Nurses' Day have been treated to a classical music performance by a string quartet. The nurses, including some retired staff, were serenaded at one of Madrid's biggest vaccination centres, whilst the public were receiving their jabs. Spain has recorded almost 79,000 deaths from COVID-19, but the number of new cases has halved since January.
Finally, more than 200 million. That's the number of unmarried adults in China. While some studies have linked this to a wider gender gap, it appears that more young Chinese people are putting off marriage by choice. Gao Ang reports.
Marriage and love life is not a necessity for me, but it's a necessity for my parents.
Claire Zhao graduated from a top university in the U.S. and works as a strategy analyst. In China, she's in the right age to settle down.
And since it is a necessity for my parents, I'm probably going to need it.
So she decided to try something she's never done before, one of China's many matchmaking markets.
I'm done. I'm like looking at a lot of people who are here for their sons and daughters. I'm wondering if my parents are going through the same thing. And I sincerely don't want to put them in the same position.
In China, marrying within a certain age range has long been the norm, and many family members are very involved in the process. So being single still comes with some social pressure.
The first time I felt like a little bit of anxiety in this matchmaking process was that when I was scrolling our company app, and it has a dating page where people can post their photos and like the requirements to look for the other half. However, like all the posts are from girls.
Experts say this imbalance is more noticeable in less developed areas. For example, in Western China, the number of single males aged between 30 and 39 grew by nearly 12% from the years 2000 and 2015.
Many rural women migrate to urban areas for work and end up settling down there. As a result, unmarried men outnumber the women eligible for marriage in the countryside.
Studies suggest that across many cultures, socioeconomic status is a key factor in the search for a life partner. How a person performs in school, what kind of job they have, and how much money they make. Wang tells me that marriage choices in China are still driven by historical trends and traditional customs. He says in a tiered socioeconomic class model, for example, many Chinese men turn to marry down, while most women choose to marry up.
An A-category man will look for B-category women. This makes it difficult for an A-category woman to find someone better.
Young Chinese share complex and varying feelings towards marriage. There's also a growing sentiment around the freedom that comes with being single.
Many of us aren't in a rush to get married or have kids. It takes a lot of energy and money, and such decisions affect our living standards.
A long-standing preference for male children, and a growing age gap between couples. These are other factors driving China's single population boom. An analyst says it's worth watching how shifts in China's society will shape its future. Gang, CGTN, Beijing.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps like Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. We're also on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye. Bye.